Welcome to Happy Times and Places, a Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Haydock, ask a friendly and creative person to choose their favourite things about a Doctor Who story, and I have to guess what they are.
Hi Toby. Hi everyone. My name's Emma Reeves. I'm a writer and I am here today to talk about Timelash.
Well, welcome back everybody. I hope you haven't had an unpleasant journey to get here. Let's see what happens when Avon off of Blake 7 throws Doctor Who through a tinsel door in episode 2 of Timelash, as chosen by TV producer and writer Emma Reeves. We're going to press play in 3, 2, 1. Oh, that's a great way to open, isn't it? So here we are in sparkly 1980s Doctor Who, on quite a beige planet. I think I interrupted myself with the model shot of Carfel. I thought we were going to be in Aztec times, and I loved the idea of an historical. I think I loved the idea more than I'd have enjoyed the execution, much as I love the historicals now. But I think that's because I'm a grown-up. Anyway, Glenn McCoy, who he's also on Twitter. And if you look at him, and on the making of documentary on this, which I haven't seen for ages, but I remember at the time when it came out, he looks about 5. He was a paramedic. Had he written for Angels? I think he might have done, but he certainly wrote for EastEnders after this, because I remember seeing his name on the credits for EastEnders and going, oh, it's the Timelash guy. I don't think anyone in EastEnders ever got called a microcephalic apostate. It's really curious that he uses that sentence, you're as powerful as burnt out android, and of course a burnt out android is a thing that happens in this. I don't know if that's deliberate, but it's quite an odd metaphor. He does smoky smouldery eyes better than anybody. And I remember I met Paul Darrow at a subsequent convention where I didn't have to handle him, and I think he took some handling. It was in Liverpool. He was handled very well. I think it was Paul Griggs that did it, who's a fan from Liverpool who does very good on stage interviews. But I think he had his work cut out, because Paul, I think, wanted to do it in his own inimitable style. But you see, I think if you're running a convention, a guest who is difficult to control is actually marvellous fun for the audience. This is there's a bit of action there. I like the fact that Herbert and Vina have, without even communicating, worked out a nifty way to cover the cameras. This is why you can't have mirrors on Carfel. Oh yes, I feel a bit sorry for Brunner. I don't think he says anything even in this episode. Off he goes down to the Timelash to invent a board game. I like the way that Eric Deacon does that kind of, we've not been introduced, but I've heard somebody call you the Doctor, so I will say Doctor in a way that suggests that I've just learnt that that's your name. An awful lot to do with 2 syllables, and he did it well. Now, were they supposed to get in the way of the camera? I quite liked that. The scene you would think would end with the 2-shot of the Doctor and Vina, but actually the suggesting the sort of business and the messing about and the urgency of it by having them sort of clumsily get in the way, or was it deliberate? I quite like that. I think that was okay. Oh. Robert Ashby's voice is golden, and he did lots of voiceovers. I'm not... No, I love the android, but he had a similar close-up in episode 1 where he was impassive, and there he did a little bit of a smile. I'm not sure I approve of that decision. I think the android is androidy. Don't suddenly think you're in Blade Runner, mate. Just... and Colin Baker does have a great energy as the Doctor. He never flags, and I think he's asked to do some quite difficult stuff. And let's be honest, the idea that the Doctor should look like somebody has pebble dashed Harpo marks with Dolly mixture laced with LSD and pure 1980s juice is means perhaps he's got an awful lot to compete with. He did, I think, very gamely say, if anybody's to wear that costume, you want to be the one in it, which I think is he's doing what I'm doing. You know, he's accentuating the positive. He's on record as saying he would have preferred a more austere costume. I have to say, at the time, I think I said this, I did quite like it. My brother had some of those trousers, but they were blue with black stripes. And I remember, because I was always in hand-me-down clothes, when it got to my turn to wear them. I think I did wear them when I was at university. Don't judge me. But this Timelash, they're at least doing things with the camera, aren't they? To I think perhaps mess with the set a bit, because in the sort of studio photos of that set, it looked very much like polystyrene crystals. But they've the wind machine and the lighting and the if it's not a filter, it's a bit of camera. They've done something with the camera lens, haven't they? That's not a wobbly set, but it is not the most secure of time crystals, which is a bit of a euphemism for a wobbly bit of scenery, but I'm going with it. And so there's, yes, I mean, that is tinsel, isn't it? That is tinsel in the Timelash. It's not my favourite bit of tinsel in Doctor Who. We will come to that when we do another story slightly after this. It's one of my most glorious bits of Doctor Who ever. But I have to be careful, because what I don't want to do is go, oh, I'm enjoying this because it's bad, because I think that is against the... although it's really hard when you have somebody who sounds like she's been doped up to the eyeballs having to say he's dangling on the edge of oblivion. But then we cut to this prison set that I don't remember. Haven't seen the story for ages. That's a terrific set with a beautiful bit of lighting and some nice angles. And the way that the lighting angles with the bars, I think I'm in love with the prison set, more so than the set of the inside of the Timelash, or the tinsel triangle of doom. And of course, to have them going into it, I think slightly takes away from its power as the central thing of the story that is the major threat. It's sort of crawling into the mouth of the dragon, isn't it? But these actors are all doing their best. I'm not sure it's the best acted story in the world, but I'm also not sure that's anybody's fault. I think sometimes you can be doing your best acting, and just because of the way that things are presented, it doesn't necessarily translate what you're doing as well as possible sometimes. That may sound like I'm letting the actors off the hook, but I'm not sure it is. I think performances have to be framed correctly by a director, and I know Pennant Roberts was seen as an actor's director, but I think I can see actors working hard here and not necessarily being shown in their best light. Now, David Ashton, Kendron, who is a really good actor, really interesting actor, who I think is slightly odd in this, he is married, or was married, I don't know entirely, to Yonina Scott, who is Marn, another male part turned into a female part by Pennant Roberts in The Sunmakers. So he's in that illustrious band of husband and wives who have been in Doctor Who, which I'm sure one day do a tedious podcast about. Dennis Carey, of course, is as the old man. I never quite was convinced, because it was obvious that the Borad was the guy in the chair with the scary voice. I never quite felt that they'd married the idea that this was the ersatz Sporad. Dennis Carey does a good bit of android acting here, and I like the stuff coming out of the back of his head. I think that's quite an arresting image, and he does. But Dennis Carey, of course, had been Professor Chronotis in Sharda, directed by Pennant Roberts. That hadn't got made, and Professor Chronotis is a brilliant part. And you could clearly see Pennant Roberts had felt guilty about it not getting finished, and rang Dennis Carey and went, "I've got a chance for you to do a Doctor Who again, Dennis." "Oh, is it a marvellous, eccentric Time Lordy type person?" "No, it's a robotic avatar passing itself off as somebody who is actually an evil lizardy thing that isn't played by you." "Yeah, well, sorry, I'm not doing anything anyway." But he had been back in the meantime in The Keeper of Traken, playing the title role, The Keeper of Traken, but not for Pennant Roberts. But it's fair to say that Dennis Carey's best Doctor Who part is the one that wasn't really broadcast. Linen is a beast, isn't it? There's clearly no point in ironing on Carfel. I wonder if that's one of the reasons they don't have mirrors. It's because they're always going to look slightly. I had a jacket like that once, and try as I might, it never looked anything other than like I'd just been in a tumble dryer. I actually quite like that jacket. A partner threw it away and tried to dress me in a different way. Oh dear. Anyway, so yes, I never think they quite rationalise that they're talking to the face on the screen and there's this guy in the chair, but that's okay. You're lying. He's having a go, David Ashton, but I think he gives a better of account of himself in Brass particularly, and Hamish Macbeth, and has done loads since, and would be an interesting subject for interview. I mean, I would love to. So if anybody knows David Ashton, or indeed Tracy Louise Ward, who, as Cats, I'd forgotten. I'm not. That's quite horrible. Shot in the back, but it saves having to do the complicated aging makeup from the front, and it shows how ruthless Tekka is. Yes, if Tracy Louise Ward as Cats was in Cat's Eyes, perhaps Paul Darrow's Tekka could have been in a Tekka to High Road. That's all of those. That's the only one of those I'm going to do. And I think Nicola Bryant enjoyed her costume in this, which is nice. It does look actually like clothes somebody would wear. She's not always dressed the most practically. That is a very phallic laser gun. My goodness. I remember when Dan Dare changed artist in The Eagle, and a guy called Oliver Frey did it, and he was a friend of a friend, and a friend of my brother's friend, and my brother's friend went, "Oh yeah, Ollie likes putting phallic things in his stuff," and then pointed out all the guns in this thing did look slightly like appendages. So I think I'm quite attuned to see essence of dong in laser guns where some might be present. You'd think somebody. I mean, most people in the entertainment industry have very filthy minds, so I'm not sure those things can be done by accident. Yes, Tracy Louise Ward as Cats, as well as all the amazing stuff I said about her last episode. She put up bail for Julian Assange, and I think lost it. I don't know I don't know why I know these things. Is that part of a cyber gun? I think it might be. So yes, big on ecology, pig farming, catwalk model. A sister of Rachel Ward, Rachel Ward, actually. But also, I think lost a few £1,000s that she'd put up as bail for Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks guy. So she's very busy. Yes, I remember thinking that was quite... Oh, now I've got... Hang on. I asked some people on my Patreon page to come up with some questions or some observations about these stories that I'm doing, just so that it's not just me droning on. We have input from other people. So, Nathan Moore, who's one of my patrons at patreon.com/Toby Haydoke. That was a plug, by the way. Did you see how organically I worked it into proceedings? He's got some favourite things. So I might list those. And Tim Dickinson has said, do you think time has been kinder to Timelash over the years? I've never heard a good word said about it. I think it's not bad at all. I think it is an example of how people imagine Doctor Who to be in the 80s. But I also know that actually we perhaps will see the differences between, say, this and the next story of Revelation of the Daleks, which I think is objectively better directed and better written and better acted. I think the likes of us can discern the differences, whereas perhaps a not we, as they are called, might find them fairly similar looking. I don't know that, but I do think this is when people like Victoria Wood made sketches about what Doctor Who was like. This is sort of, I think, what they imagined, and not unfairly. Could the Tecker and Company spin-off been a full series, says Tim Dickinson. If only Paul Darrow didn't have to drink wine, drive an Austin Metro and put on his jogging gear in the freezing cold. Haha, I'd have liked to have seen that. Tecker and Company, indeed. Yes, look at that. Yes, look at that gun. It's a bit half-mast at the moment. Not going to do anybody any good at that angle. I'd try and grow up, Toby. Nathan Moore, like, his favourite things are the Borad's mask and the overall performance. I think I will be choosing that. The lighting in the Borad's lair, I chose the lighting last time. He likes this bit, the idea of moving forward in time and leaving an image behind, even if it's not used to its full effect. That is trying to do something with time, and of course this is a story about time travel, and what we'll learn about Herbert ties in with that. The scenes in the TARDIS between the Doctor and Herbert, good bit of comedy. We'll come to those later. And the design of the robot android. Well, I have already chosen the robot. Not as much the design as the movement and design combo. I know some of Perry's scenes in this episode were actually held back from part one because part one was overrunning. Oh yes, I remember. I like it. Now there's a bit of sort of. That's a funny shot of Tracy Louise Ward. Oh yes, and Cezanne gets shot. This is quite a nifty action sequence, and I love the way that Eric Deacon really gets into it. I think it's the best way to do it, especially if you're having to do a gunfight in a BBC television studio with 3 cameras on you and a necessarily staged thing going on. But actually, this isn't. Yeah, well done, Eric Deacon. He rolled around there. He had lots of piss and vinegar. Even did a skid he didn't intend to do, but that's a picture of Sean Pertwee. It really is. It looks like Sean Pertwee playing John Pertwee. That really is. It's like they've gone 20 years into the future and got that Sean Pertwee dressed up as his dad and used that. It really is a time travel story. Dickon Ashworth at the back has given up and is just leaning, propping himself up on his elbow. And I don't think Sesame does anything now, so I wonder why they decided to injure him and not kill him, because a death is obviously more dramatic and more moving, especially as I don't think he does that much. Did I mention his earring last week? I like the fact that he's got an earring. That seemed quite cool to me. I don't think I hadn't remembered that he'd got an earring. I know Rodney Bewser's got one in Resurrection of the Daleks as well, hasn't he? Oh, I'd forgotten this spaceship. That's all right. That's playing battleships on a BBC Micro. She's pissed. She's gotta be. I cannot account for that but I'm very amused by it. uh, I I like the way that Colin sort of Colin Baker interacts sort of peevishly with people, because I do sense there's a warmth underneath, and I think he sometimes has to battle against the writing, but and certainly against the costume, and sometimes against actors like Paul Darrow. Now, I think it's worth talking about the Borad as we're about to go into his lair, played by Robert Ashby, whose real name was something like Rashid Sudaworth. I'm not gonna get into trouble by pronouncing it badly, but Bob, I worked with Bob on my first ever professional job, and I said to him, "You were the Borad in Timelash." I didn't. I just went, oh, "I'm a big Doctor Who fan. You remember?" And he said, and he said, "Well, I already didn't like Doctor Who before I was in it, because my girlfriend was in Doctor Who, and I had to watch it every week, and I hated it then." And I said, "Who was your girlfriend?" And he said, "She played a character called Leela." I went, "You went out with Louise Jameson?" And I've since know Louise. So yeah, the Borad and Leela were a couple for many, many years in the 70s when Louise was doing Doctor Who, I think. Yeah, it must have been, because he said I had to watch Doctor Who. I was like, "But you watched really good Doctor Who." But his father was either Prime Minister of Pakistan or a senior politician in that part of the world anyway. And his mother was a Russian actress. So it's from a really interesting background. The name Robert Ashby is an adopted one for the Borad. But that is a great makeup. It's a brilliant voice. It's a performance several leagues above, I think, much that is around it. I am definitely choosing the Borad. I like that high-angled shot as well. But that's a great makeup, and it's not just a personal thing that Bob was actually very kind to me. I say it was my first professional job. I was a sixth form college student, and me and a friend were elected to be spear carriers at Ludlow Festival, did Shakespeare in the Castle, and my brother had done it a few years before and got a speaking part, and I was very jealous because they needed Princes in the Tower for Richard III, played by Edward Woodward. I mean, this was no, provincial thing, because it was done in a castle in the open air for 2 weeks over the summer. So a lovely holiday, and Shakespeare in a castle in an old market town. Beautiful. And when I came to do it, it was directed by Arturo Villar from the War Games. And it had the Borad in it as... I've already mentioned this in this podcast, because Jimmy Ellis was Shylock, was the Merchant of Venice. And the Prince of Morocco and the Duke of Venice were played by Bob Ashby. And me and my friend John were going to be the Duke of Morocco's pages, and then we had to change very quickly and be pages of the Prince of Aragon. But because this was 1989, Bob, although he was brown-skinned because he was half Pakistan or half Indian, I don't know entirely. Nonetheless, to play the Prince of Morocco, he was in full blackface in 1989. Maybe it was 87. As were me and my friend John to play his pages. And we couldn't get the makeup off quick enough. So, fortunately, I then didn't have to do that makeup, because I became the Prince of Aragon's page and my friend John was the Duke of Morocco's. So I am spared there being any photographic evidence that could get all Justin Trudeau on me. But, this was not long after the BBC had scoured the pantheon of great actors to play Othello for their BBC Shakespeare, and chose that famous black actor Anthony Hopkins. So this was practice at the time that looks appalling now. It didn't seem so then, and that is a good sign. And yet, isn't it extraordinary that it's in living memory? Shut up and go. That's brilliant. The way I think that's probably the way to dismiss somebody that's going for it. So anyway, yeah, Bob and Bob had to listen to incessant wittering from this young 16-year-old wannabe actor, and he took it with great grace. And he had a wonderful dry sense of humour. Smoked Benson and Hedges. My mum rather fancied him. He had a very casually sexy way about him, I think. Yeah, very early to kill off Paul Darrow in episode 2. And I think it could have probably done with him hanging around, but of course the script is a bit all over the place in terms of timing. In fact, Bob told me that he had to write a lot of his own dialogue, and he does a bit later on say, "Choose your next words carefully, Doctor, they could be your last," which is I think is a James Bond line, isn't it? And he had it on videotape, so actually he brought me his videotape with all his stuff on so that I could watch it. So I watched the whole of Timelash this before, because I hadn't videoed I didn't have a video when this was on. But he also had some of his other TV stuff on it, and a couple of EastEnders appearances where he played a probation officer. And they were quite a few months apart, the two scenes, and in one he's really nice and in one he's quite hard. And I remember saying, "Oh, was that originally two different characters?" And they sort of made you consolidate them. And he was really complimentary. He said, "Oh, that's interesting, because well spotted, that is the case." And he wasn't patronising at all. He was really engaging and really kind. And I liked him a lot. But he was very funny. I remember one very sunny matinee, he came off stage, and I think it was because the World Cup was on as well, so a lot of people weren't necessarily fully engaged. But I remember the Duke of Morocco is quite a funny part, and he used to get big laughs, but not on a sunny matinee in the afternoon. I remember saying, "Effing Philistines, don't know why they bother coming to the theatre." And he didn't entirely mean it, but it was very dryly and funnily done. And yeah, he did add a couple of other moments where he was very, very dryly amusing. And he's, seeing as he's stuck in a chair, and that's not his own stomach. He was in decent shape, so they've also made him less svelte than he need be, and stuck behind a makeup, albeit a very good one. I think he does a marvellous job with his voice alone, but he did have a fantastic voice. And he and Paul Darrow only died last year. But I was sad. I was sad to see him go. I think he turned down a knighthood. I don't know why he would have got a knighthood. It must be for some stuff, because it wasn't for his services to the acting profession, although he was a good jobbing actor. I wonder if I don't know if it's something to do with his heritage or his charity work or something, or that's sort of beyond my radar. But I'm sure there was a story that he turned down a knighthood. So you can investigate that if you want to. But he also did lots of voiceovers for Tonight on BBC One, and had a decent career. I'd love to end this with a beautiful coda. He did a signing for Phantom Films, and I went along with my pictures of the Merchant of Venice to show him, and hoped he might go, "Oh yes, I remember you, and how proud I am that you've gone on to..." Didn't remember me at all, and didn't even pretend to. He was nice, he was nice enough. But it wasn't the tearful reunion, perhaps, in the back of my mind I'd really hoped for. And why would it be? I was a 16-year-old wannabe, and it was 2 weeks of his life, 35 years earlier. But I still remember him very fondly. So now all of that is, I know, a distraction from what's going on here, because we had a bit of, it's tricky. This is a script in trouble, because we've just lost the two main villains, and we're going to have to bring one of them back again with, I have to say, not a particularly satisfactory explanation. Oh yes, but Perry's being threatened by the Morlocks. There's a missile flying out of a spaceship. I'm seeing phallic symbols everywhere now. I'm not sure I should be, but that's not entirely undongy. Herbert's coming into his own here. I like that they have the character of Herbert, and I do like the wheeze of who Herbert is. I love the fact that I'm stringing you along. If you're listening to this commentary, you've never watched the story. Although no, actually, some people are. I mean, I will be dispensing spoilers. I'm sorry about that. Somebody did say with my first one, they sent some lovely feedback. Hello, but they were saying they'd never actually seen it, so they did it with me yabbering on. Watch the story first. Don't let me spoil the surprise as to who Herbert is, which I think is a nice thing that Doctor Who. I was always slightly thrilled. It always had the knack, I think, Doctor Who, of using bits of history or historical figures that I somehow had heard of because I'd been taught them at school or they were part of folklore. So I was thrilled when it was Pudding Lane. I was excited when it was Halley's Comet. I knew who Herbert was, and it all made sense, and it all was not a nice sort of cleverly grafted in gag, but through a character that we've enjoyed. Come on, Bandrel Ambassador, you melancholy sock thing. He does have authority, Colin Baker, and there's the the slightly weepy stocking beast. Oh, I love the fact that he's having a chat with somebody off screen. Nigel, call the spaceships off. So how are we doing? So what have I got? Any other observations about Timelash from the patrons? What did yes, he's never heard a nice word said about it, says Tim, and I think it does display a few of its problems. A couple of these TARDIS scenes are late additions because the episode was underrunning, and I already mentioned in episode 1. I think, and it's one of the great things that Andrew Cartmel does when he comes in, is he goes, a lot of those big scenes in the TARDIS, there's a sort of habit of having scenes in the TARDIS where the main characters argue with each other. And that's compounded by the fact that then you occasionally need to add a couple more because the episode's underrunning. I mean, they marshal their resources quite well, although, of course, the TARDIS isn't in Revelation of the Daleks, so they have to rig up the set especially. But you're using your 2 contracted actors, and it's quite nice for Herbert, who's in a couple of the extended scenes as well. So that actor, I think, probably got an extra couple of bits of money. Yeah, and you know, this is the Doctor doing the classic thing of bluffing to his companion in order that she does not face danger. Although Perry does sort of undermine that by going, but if anything happens to you, I'll be stranded on this planet, which makes you sort of go, yeah, that shouldn't be your main concern. It should be more, if anything happens to you, I'll be sad because you've died. I do like the way that Herbert keeps popping up to the irritation of the Doctor. I'm enjoying Herbert a lot more than I expected to. David Chandler did not have the career that, say, Stephen McIntosh and Christine Kavanagh and many other actors who get breaks during the JNT era, which was pretty good at predicting talent. But I hope he's happy. But I'm aware I've got to keep talking in order to keep this interesting. But of course, we are sort of delaying the action because the action should be happening at this juncture. But that we've had to brazen the action out. I wonder if John Nathan Turner should have not been so keen on the Timelash cliffhanger and perhaps had a cliffhanger a bit earlier with Perry and the Morlocks because they did lose material from part one, and I think some quite good sounding stuff. I think there's a scene where the Borad, watched Vina and Mikros embrace and felt a pang of loneliness because obviously he feels sad that because of the way he looks, no one will love him. I think his sort of psychopathic behaviour might also be a bit of a barrier. Yeah, okay. I think we're all struggling a bit now. But yeah. I think this is a bit like when you're on stage with somebody else, and somebody else is supposed to come on and hasn't, and you're having to sort of between you keep going, and as the panic increases, I think your performances get slightly bigger because you also don't exactly know where you're going or also where it's going to end. So I know that's not exactly what's happening here, but it is cut from the same cloth. We've got two actors trying to get us all out of trouble, but I can see why Timelash. Tim Dickinson, one of my correspondents here, said he's never heard anyone have a good word about it. It is a story that doesn't have a great reputation, and I think it's partially because it does sort of fall apart in this sort of latter half of part two. But it is an anagram of lame sh something Tahir nearly says in part one. T, and that has been used as a rather unfair descriptor, and there is also the thing of any story with time in the title is in the classic series is bound to be in a bit of trouble. Nobody's great fans of Time and the Rani, The Invasion of Time. Yes, I know somebody out who's going to go, well, I am, like the bloke in The Life of Brian, who is actually Terence Baylor from The War Games and the Ark. But I'll tell you that when we're doing The War Games and the Ark. Oh, poor old Herbert. But... And of course, we have I recently did the quiz of Rassilon, and I had to set questions on the Curse of Fatal Death, which of course has the get out clause of I'll tell you later about how certain things happen. Where is Sesam? Why is Sesam still alive? He hasn't done anything. Well, I don't think there's been an election, Mick Ross. Do you have dictatorship in your bones? But of course, we have that with the Doctor and her. But here we do have the how did you do that? I'll tell you later, which I think is a bit of a liberty. I mean, at least say I span the tangential arc and that deflected that you could come up with a you could come up with a thing that sounded believable even if it wasn't proper science. But it does give the impression that everything's been done in a bit of a hurry. Oh. Yeah, that flapjack you ate just needs to wear off a bit, I think, Fina. Yeah, where Sezon he's feeling very sorry for himself. He should be pleased he's not dead. And I'd like to get to the bottom of why, because they're sort of referring to Sezon, even though we don't really see him. I don't understand. Now, I'm quite cross with the DVD because I had the DVD menu on this before starting. It's got this bit. It's got the death of Tekka. I do sometimes wish the DVD people had been quite a few fillings there, Perry. That's I like the way that they've sticked his hair as well. So I'll explain later. And it was just a clone of me, and I've got another one so that we can do another ending. And this bit wasn't added at the last minute, but it sort of feels like it has been. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's yeah. I think like the Borad's face, it's all fallen apart a bit. But it does mean we get to see a bit more of Robert Ashby, not stuck to a chair, getting to do a bit of threatening acting, which we rather like. He's adding himself to the list of bad guys that lusts after Perry. I'm not sure I like this this thing of, oh, you're a bit ugly, so that this sort of, if you're ugly, people will find you appalling, and that will make you very sad. I'm not particular. I'd forgotten about this. I'm not particularly comfortable with that. And I suppose he's there. He says the picture of me on Tinder. I'm only showing this side of my face. I'm not showing the reptile-y side. But I suppose the Doctor is doing what he needs to do in order to trick the Borad. That I don't think putting out both of somebody's eyes is going to convince them to go out with you. I'm not sure the people behind Doctor at this time had quite got the how to do the romance thing quite sorted. So what's your answer to the idea that somebody doesn't fancy you? I'll just poke both their eyes out. And of course he becomes the Loch Ness Monster, which see, this is this. I think this is quite mean and not brilliantly staged. I'm supposed to be accentuating the positive, but I have to admit I'm finding it slightly strugglesome. I think Robert Ashby is doing a decent job, but I think this is hard to stage. The Doctor's behaviour is not massively pleasant, but I suppose we can justify that by going, he had to be cruel and to be mean in order to produce the response that we needed. And actually he survives by being the Loch Ness Monster. So presumably when he goes down the Timelash, he also stops being a bad guy who wants to pluck out women's eyes in order to make them go out with him, because instead he just swims forever. So maybe like Vina, he bangs his head and is just slightly distracted for the rest of his life. I'm trying to. So he's destroyed. I always like a bit of debris flying through a door. It's a wonderfully BBC Doctor Who thing. You can imagine a prop man with a little gun going, "Okay, Arthur, now." Brilliant. Why weren't you blown up? I'll explain one day. Ooh, okay. So, well, look, I hope I stuck with the remit there. And again, I'm not quite sure who you're saying you'd be most welcome to there, Vina. You don't quite know. You can't quite look anybody in the eye. And of course Herbert isn't going to stay because spoiler alert. But I do think this is a neat little way to end, and the clues have been there because of Vina and Weena and the Morlocks, and I mean it's a bit cheeky of Doctor Who, a show about time travel, to go, you know, the guy who wrote some great literature about time travel, we sort of made him, because you didn't. But I like that as a coda. I like the reveal that Herbert is H.G. Wells, and the fact that it doesn't spoon feed it at the end and go, Herbert becomes, they don't spell it out. They trust your intelligence to know that. So, yeah, I must admit I struggled in places there. I'm sorry about that. I do try my very best. I still think it's entertaining. I would still watch that for entertainment, sometimes for the wrong reasons. I think sometimes the acting is entertaining for the wrong reasons, sometimes for the right reasons, and in some places it's pretty decent. But yeah, that was and it was my first Colin Baker story for this, and I'm very fond of Colin Baker, and I think he sometimes has to work hard with the material he's given, and I'm slightly disquieted by the whole you're physically disgusting, therefore nobody's gonna love you. I'm not sure that's a message we'd go with in Doctor Who today. But look, I hope that was an interesting trip through time. I'm not even wearing any tinsel or glitter to take you there. So, my favourite things. 2 things and a bonus thing. Well, I think the 2 things that are obvious to me are Robert Ashby as the Borad. Both the look, the makeup, and the performance. The voice. And the gag, the coda, the joke that Herbert is revealed to be H.G. Wells, and the way that they thread Herbert into the story. And actually, I thought I might have to, give that character a bit of leeway with the performance. And I don't think he always cracks it, but I think he was given a really difficult task. And actually, I think David Chandler did a very decent job there under, I think, quite tricky circumstances. And now a bonus thing about Timelash that I can't choose Paul Darrow, because Paul Darrow has been, and I was going to cheat and go, I like the fact that there's the picture of John Pertwee disguised as Sean Pertwee, but I think that's a bit the same as what Emma chose with the Joe Grant thing in episode 1. So in a way, Emma's made my task very hard by sort of touching upon 2 elements I might have chosen, and so now can't. I think I'm going to have to go with, I actually think, considering it's a sock puppet voiced by an actor who's already played a part in it, I think there's a certain sort of mournful dignity to the Bandril ambassador, and the fact that, it's obviously a sort of, it's a sort of glove puppet keyed into the studio, that has a chat with Nigel in the spaceship next to it. I actually think there's a little bit of character there, and there's a sort of there's a sort of melancholy charm that slightly reminds me of my dog about the Bandril ambassador, which is perhaps clutching at straws. But sometimes this will be an exercise in straw clutching. Let's see what on earth Emma Reeves, who, by the way, I've never met. Isn't this the lovely thing about Doctor Who, is I've had cause to email Emma in a capacity where I was passing on some information to her that's a third party had sort of put us in touch. And I was able to approach her because I think it's important to hear from people who perhaps work in the industry or who are creatives, because they'll be looking at it through more than just a lens of sort of childhood nostalgia, which I know is a very important lens, but I think it gives it a bit of an extra edge. So thank you to Emma, because we don't know each other. I don't want this to appear like, there's all these Doctor Who fans who get together and talk about Doctor Who and all the things that we've never met. So what's Emma chosen? about Timelash 2 and a bonus.
For episode 2, I'm just going to start by saying tinsel, tinsel, tinsel. I mean, so much tinsel. Tinsel, of course, being the entrance to the Timelash, and then the Timelash is full of tinsel. I love the fact that after most people just depart with a scream, they cut to the tinsel, and that's then repeated for the opening of episode 2. So fantastic commitment there, and just loving the tinsel. And as a little bonus, I also love the android. So there. Now on to something genuinely really good. The Borad's makeup, the Borad's face. I think that's really well done. I remember it vividly as a child. It's sort of, obviously there are some worrying messages about facial difference in this episode, and we shouldn't ignore that. That's unfortunate. I would have loved to have seen a race of people who looked like the Borad, and who were different, with different personalities, rather than just sort of megalomaniacal monsters. But that would probably been too expensive to do it more than once. But that makeup job, it really stands out in the production. It's brilliant. It holds up. I remember thinking it was great as a kid, and I didn't sort of think, oh, scary monster looking different. I kind of thought, whoa, that's cool. So for me, it's a big thumbs up for the look of the Borad. Makeup credited to Vanessa Poulton. I'm sure Toby will have lots to add about that. And finally, my extra has to be the whole H.G. Wells influence. I love David Chandler as Herbert. Actually, I really like him. In the show, I would have been happy to see him stick around longer. The references to the time machine, the end of Dr. Moreau, all that's brilliant. So those are my favourite things about Timelash. And as for me, I recently was lead writer on a new version of The Demon Headmaster, which is still available on BBC iPlayer. Joe Lidster is also one of the writers, so please do check it out on iPlayer, and we're making a second series next year, COVID permitting. So thanks very much, everyone, and thanks, Toby. Bye.
Well, my super thanks to Emma, who is a busy creative in the television industry, produced the brilliant reimagining, a new version of the Demon Headmaster. So thank you. So she chose. Well, I think I chose H.G. Wells. So did she. I sort of chose the Borad. I know she went for the makeup and I went for a bit of both. So I'm claiming them. She went for the tinsel. I was never going to go for the tinsel. But we didn't have any crossover on episode 1. So it's 3-2, I think, to Emma. But that's pretty good for me, because the chances that I'm going to ever win this are extraordinarily slim. Slimmer than the chances of Timelash ever getting to the top of anyone's sort of favourite story list. But I thought we made a pretty brave stab to go for Timelash. It's interesting that she too, was uncomfortable with the sort of facial difference thing, which going into this I hadn't imagined. Also, though, going into this I hadn't imagined with every story. I think it's with Battlefield I have, with Evil of the Daleks I have, aspects of race and depiction of race. It's interesting how conscious we are of those things now, and I mentioned it not because of what happened in this story, but because of Bob Ashby blacking up in that production of The Merchant of Venice in the late 1980s. And I would, on my hand on my heart, nobody in that production was a person with any racism in them at all. So this idea that we look back in the past and go, well, everyone was awfully racist. They did a thing that would rightly seen to be racist now, and yet oddly it was part of the fabric of how things were done. So when I tell that story, when I look back, I now go, oh my! I don't go, God, how disgusting. I sort of go, it's almost bizarre to me that was normal, and yet it was. But in the same way, I guess, that saying, well, the reason you're a villain is because you have a twisted, ugly face, and people with ugly faces are bad or turn bad, is also, I think, terribly offensive. And I've been working today. I've been doing a thing for getting more awareness of disability within the arts and with the creative industries, and it's still something that is important and underused and undervalued. And the idea that I suspect if my partner wasn't asleep now, and I said, "Yeah, this story is about," come and watch this story with me, where the end, where somebody who's got a disfigured face is bullied by Doctor Who for being ugly and nobody ever wanting to be with them. I actually think she'd probably beat me to death with a spade, or perhaps just hit me over the head with a spade until I'm as stunned as Jean Ann Crowley was. So, I mean, that's, I raise all of that stuff because I think it's interesting. Again, I'm cautious of doing that because of the way that discourse can take place in this day and age. But I think it's interesting to sort of raise these things and discuss them with a certain detachment, because this is from the past and we can't do anything about it. In the same way that we can't do anything about, the practice that Robert Ashby went through to play the Prince of Morocco, which many, many actors in that decade on the British stage will have done. And you wouldn't do now, and rightly so. So it's interesting. Time is interesting, which Timelash is all about. How time, will the winds of time wash us clean? Yeah, well, hopefully they do. So I hope that's been more interesting than perhaps a podcast about Timelash might have been, because we were trying to look for the things to celebrate about it. And I'm sorry if I didn't always manage to do that, but my heart is pure. Come back for the next one of these. Thanks for being here for this one. Thanks to Emma Reeves. And I will see you some other time. Take care. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Happy Times and Places with me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest, Emma Reeves. This episode's featured patrons are Pascal Zierka, Sydney Wilson, John Williams, Rich Wiggins, Kevin West, Peter Ware, Alistair Wallace, Gary Wales, Sydney Trout, Paul Taylor-Greaves, Adam Stone, David Spencer, Richard Smith, Paul Shields, Jim Sangster, Gavin Rymil, Quaridors, Monsieur Poirot, Thomas Payne, Ken Patterson, Russell Parker, Nick Mellish, Pip Madeley, Sean McAllister, and Nate Lynch. The music for the podcast was by Dave Gates, and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. And if you would like to become a patron, where you get exclusives and advanced releases, please do go to patreon.com/Toby Haydock. You can also support me by making a one-off payment to kofi.com/Toby Haydock. And please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and to rate and to review this podcast, only if you're going to do so nicely, wherever you download it from. Thank you ever so much.